Anthony Newbold. Welcome to A Closer Look. We continue to deal with the impact of COVID-19 on the Bahamas. And this week, we're going to focus on the possible mental fallout from the lockdowns and curfews. And for that, we've invited the medical advisor to the Public Hospitals Authority, Dr. Nelson Clarke. He was head of psychiatry at the Sandlands Rehabilitation Center for many years. Dr. Clarke, welcome to A Closer Look.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming to talk to us. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Usually when you're talking about that, you're talking about war veterans and people who've been in a combat zone. I'm thinking it wouldn't be totally out of line to think those are some of the conditions that we're experiencing right now, and we could see some of those behavior after this thing is over.
Well, certainly when the phrase was first used many years ago, people referred to it as a kind of combat neurosis, shell shock syndrome. It was commonly seen in persons who had been at war and who haven't returned home began to have symptoms. Sometimes some very disturbing symptoms like reliving the experiences, being easily startled, having problems with sleep, various different symptoms. This was probably around about the time of the First World War, when the phrase shell shock and combat neurosis began being used. Certainly, any stressful event, any serious situation in which one's life is in danger, puts one at risk for having something that we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Initially, people thought of it as a kind of anxiety syndrome, and that was the hallmark of the illness. We've come to realize now, though, that the illness is quite larger than that. And there are many, many different kinds of stressful, life-threatening events that could, in fact, precipitate the development of this post-traumatic stress disorder. So now we think of it in terms of it being a stress-related illness. And yes, there are similarities between what is happening with COVID-19.
It's been characterized as a war anyway.
Yeah.
I imagine you talk about anxiety and fear being some of those emotions that could come to the fore as a result of what has been happening to us.
Well, certainly we need to just look at it in a slightly different way. Anytime we face circumstances that might be threatening, circumstances that force us to have to change the way we live and what we do and how we do it, and for which there may be some threat of harm, then we're looking at people experiencing a stress reaction. We're looking at people having some kind of adaptive response to it. The difficulty is that, yes, we all have to have some kind of reaction to it. Most of the times we adapt, we get on with life, we continue to live, and life is okay. Now, when we're in a situation that's unpredictable and we can't see an end and we don't know how things are going to go, where there's so much uncertainty, it's a lot more difficult to adapt. So we get mild reactions, we get moderate reactions, which may cause distress, not necessarily a disorder, not necessarily a disorder that we can call PTSD. And then at the very extreme, we have this terrible situation where people have a major problem. The constellation of symptoms, the reactions are so severe that it interferes with one's ability to cope. It interferes with many aspects of one's life. It interferes with functioning and productivity, and then it comprises an illness that we refer to as the post-traumatic stress disorder.
I talk about anxiety and fear maybe being the dominant emotion, but there must be a whole range of emotions, as you say, that could follow from this kind of...
There certainly are. There certainly are. There are many, many, many reactions. I think the initial sort of reaction is one of disbelief, sometimes fear initially, sometimes questioning. Oftentimes people go into a frame of mind where the uncertainty causes them to be extremely irritable. At other times people begin to experience mood symptoms, depression, and of course anxiety is sometimes very much a common feature. Oftentimes people have difficulty with usual life issues like sleep and appetite, being able to think properly, to solve problems. They have difficulty with relationships. They have difficulty carrying out their normal everyday functions because there's a preoccupation with this phenomena that's going on and the threat that it poses for one.
How prevalent could be that depressive state, that depressed state of depression where you just, I can't deal with this?
Well, I think it may be episodic for some people. Today I feel I can't deal with it. It's terrible, it's bad, and then tomorrow things look a little brighter. But to remain in that state of being totally overwhelmed, feeling hopeless, depressed, anxious, having difficulty with sleep and appetite, not being able to make decisions, not being able to carry out your normal everyday functions, that perhaps is what we would call a depressive illness in itself if it lasts for more than 2 weeks. Yeah. That is probably not the most common thing to happen, but it does happen. The not so severe reactions are extremely common, and we probably all have those. Every one of us probably react in some way and have those kind of things happen to us. The uncertainty, the wondering when it's going to finish, how long will it be going on for, what else will I be expected to do, how am I going to cope, what's going to happen to me. Those are questions, those are feelings that come, and then comes the anxiety and maybe some transient depression from time to time, and irritability.
At some point, all of us
at some point,
room,
we may all
outside,
experience some of those feelings, symptoms, call it what you will.
Maybe an obvious question, but is there a dominant group who you'd say, in this situation that we're in now, these are the people we need to worry about?
Let me answer it in this way. There are people who may be at high risk for various reasons. One group of persons may be persons who have previously had mental health problems, serious mental health problems with depression and with anxiety. And facing this new threat may simply reignite some of those symptoms and might cause them to go into what we might call a relapse. And then, of course, there are people who may actually be infected or have been infected with the virus, who now are looking at life through a different prism. Or maybe they're having symptoms still. Or maybe their life has changed in a way that's made it very difficult for them to cope. They're probably at high risk as well. And then we have people who are at the extreme of life, either very young or very old.
Yes.
And these persons may be considered to be at risk. And then we have people who may have other problems, whether it's poverty, maybe it's living conditions that are unsatisfactory, maybe there are people who've lost their jobs, maybe people who are forced now to live in circumstances that's very difficult for them. Those people may in fact be at risk. How high the risk? It depends on the person. Even though people may have difficult life circumstances, their ability to cope might mean that they do very well.
Yeah.
And so when you ask high risk, it's not an easy, simple question to answer. For various persons at various different times, they may be at high risk.
Yeah.
And then,
but that does not necessarily have to be a constant state of being. It doesn't have to be
constant.
And so you could say children, old people could possibly be high-risk groups?
The elder persons, yes.
Yeah.
Children, very much depending on which phase of their life they're at. Very, very young children have no awareness of what's going on.
Yeah, they don't.
So they're not in it. Young people who are at the point in their life where they're experiencing adolescence and becoming more aware of the world, they may in fact have some reactions that might pose risk for them. Older young persons, maybe the young adults, who are now at the point in their life where they're beginning to look at various important decisions, college, jobs, that sort of thing, who are now looking at a different reality from the one that they faced prior to COVID, may in fact be at risk. Persons in whom there may be a strong family history of mental health problems may in fact also be at risk. Persons who have certainly had a recent life event, like a bereavement, a divorce, a serious breakup, those persons may in fact now be in a group that they could be considered
high risk.
High risk. So and it might not be a risk that's there all the time.
Yeah.
And then we have compounding problems. People who've had a bereavement, and people who've had, you know, other bad things happen to them. That could put them in this category of being at high risk.
Somebody at some point is going to start to panic. At which point does that set in?
Well, panic can happen at any point. I mean, simply being told that you will now face job loss can set off panic. Being told that one of your fellow workers has tested positive for the virus and you had recent contact with him or her might make you begin to think thoughts that lead to panic. It depends, but panic is something that is part of the human fabric. We go through panic from time to time, depending on what we're facing. The difficulty here is now, how do you cope? What do you do? How do you fix things so that you can go on and continue to live and continue to be productive and to be a responsible person in your family and in the community? How do you obey the laws? How do you do all these things that have to happen in order for you to continue to survive?
I'm going to ask you about that, but we got to take a break. When we come back, I want you to talk about that a little bit more. We'll be back with Dr. Nelson Clarke after this. Welcome back to A Closer Look. I'm Anthony Newbold, and I'm speaking with Dr. Nelson Clarke. He's the medical advisor to the Public Hospitals Authority. Dr. Clarke, we were talking about panic and how do you cope? Do we have enough mechanisms, obvious mechanisms, available mechanisms for people who do panic?
I think we do. I think there's another issue that impacts this issue. Stigma is very much a part of the landscape. I mean, we've made progress, but there is a stigma that's attached to people experiencing mental health, psychological, psychiatric, call it what you will, problems, in that we think negatively of persons so affected. We actually have some very negative beliefs about what happens when people have a problem of that kind. We think about the future, they're never going to be the same. We program in ourselves that once this person has experienced a particular kind of problem, then that's going to be with them forever.
There's no solution for that. They will always be that way.
And we also have negative thoughts and myths about outcomes of treatment. It never works. You know, you're getting this because you're weak. You're having this phenomena because you just don't know how to cope with life. Would that you could be a stronger person. Pull yourself up, man. Just get over whatever's bothering you. And so some of those myths, misinformation, stigmatizing beliefs affect people's willingness to enter into a situation called getting help. People are not prone to deal with those issues. If you've got a heart problem, if you've had palpitations, sometimes you will readily go and see a doctor. Well, most people will.
Yes.
If you get a fracture, you know, if you hurt your leg, it's not a second thought. You are going to see how you could get it fixed. There's no question about that.
Because normal people get these things. Normal,
well, our acceptance of physical health problems is universal. We just know that has to happen. You have to get it fixed. There's pain.
And we can see it.
Yes, we can see it. And there's pain that everybody acknowledges and accepts. With panic, with depression, with PTSD, with some of the other things that we call psychological mental health problems, people are unwilling, unprepared to see the pain and the suffering until it's very, very severe. the truth is that the earlier you access help, the earlier you get an intervention, it helps to set things straight, the better the prognosis, the more likely that you are going to have a good outcome, a good result. When problems have been around for a appreciable period of time, it makes the intervention more difficult. And so we're battling that. That's always there in the society. It's gotten better. In fact, worldwide, it's always there. And yes, there has been movement.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we do have avenues through which people can receive help. The community clinics, most of the physicians who work in the public health centers, the community centers, are equipped to be able to interact,
Yeah.
diagnose, and initiate treatment, and then to refer when necessary to a specialist clinic,
Yeah.
so that people can get further help if need be. Media, the internet has helped a lot. There are apps on the internet that help people to address some of the mild symptoms, and oftentimes people can access those resources and get some assistance. But I think getting to the point where you need to see somebody professionally may be
Yeah.
a big jump for many people.
Yeah. And
Doesn't happen until things are really, really bad.
really bad.
But now we have hotlines that people can call, and we can share that a little later on with you. Some
Yeah.
hotline numbers that people can use to call up and talk to a counselor and maybe make an appointment. The Bahamas Psychological Association, in conjunction with the Ministry of Health and PAHO, have
Yeah.
been responsible for making these hotlines available.
Yeah, maybe we can in post put those numbers up. You're talking about stigma, and I wanted to get to something. I was going to get to it later. I figured let's deal with it now. I imagine that's one of the reasons you don't know who's been impacted, who's been infected by COVID. They keep the name secret because there will be a stigma attached to whomever, or you had COVID.
Well, certainly with COVID, there's an additional issue, and that's the possibility of another person becoming infected from an interaction with a person who may be the source, who has the infection, who has the virus. Ostracization is certainly something that's going to happen if people knew or know that Mr. X has the virus or has had the virus. Even though people may be saying that person is cured, there may still be lingering thoughts about, is it really so? How do we know? What is there to reassure us? Do we know as much as we need to know about this virus? What are the things we don't know?
Yeah.
Can it still be present? They say people can be carriers. Is that true? And so the unknowns begin to muddy the waters, and so people's imaginations become very active. And then the stigma and the misbeliefs, the misconceptions, and the myths become part of what may be operating to, in fact, cause people to be isolated, ostracized, and stigmatized. And so maybe, yes, maybe there is merit in not publishing people's. And of course, there's the issue of confidentiality. If you go to a physician for any other problem, is it a thing to
publish
share that information?
Yeah.
Is it fair? Is it right? I think people are protected by law.
Yeah, yeah.
And so why shouldn't it be so with the COVID-19?
With the COVID as well, eh? Well, talking about stigma and some other things we need to talk about, we will get to, but we're going to have to take this final break, and we'll be back with more with Dr. Nelson Clarke on A Closer Look after this. Welcome back to A Closer Look. I'm Anthony Newbold speaking with Dr. Nelson Clarke. We were talking about stigma and all the other things that happen and could happen as a result of an event such as this. One thing we haven't talked about, serious as anything else, is the possibility of suicides resulting from this whole what are the incidents of suicides occurring?
It's a good question. Let me respond to it in two parts. One, the nature of suicide is such that sometimes it may be difficult to establish that one's death has been caused by one's own intent and actions. And so sometimes it's very difficult to detect a suicide. So that's one issue. And then, of course, there's the other side of it. We were talking about stigma a couple of minutes ago. And believe it or not, even though mental illness, mental health problems can be stigmatizing, suicide, for whatever reason, can also be a very stigmatizing issue. And then, of course, linked to that is the fact that when people commit death by suicide, insurance companies do not.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's nothing to happen. You will not get an insurance payout. So insurance companies have in their clauses very specific. If you commit suicide, then we're not paying. We will not honor this contract. So there are lots of issues that stack up to make the detection and the diagnosis of a death by suicide extremely difficult. Now let's talk about the suicide itself. An intent, an act committed with the purpose of taking one's life is how we look at this phenomenon. So you have actions that do not result in suicide, but the intent may have been to cause it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes even that, it's difficult to find out whether or not this was really what was intended. And then we have the terrible thing that happens when someone is very successful in committing the act. Now, we don't really know, but we do have statistics that are provided. It's really illegal, a coroner's decision yeah, in regard to which death is a suicide. But you have many that may be missed. And so you go to sleep at night, you wake up in the morning, and so is lying in bed, not waking up. And when you touch them, they're cold. The family discover a bottle of tablets by the bedside and are very quick to say, oh, no, let's get rid of this. You call for an ambulance or you call for a hearse and the person is taken away. People omit a little bit of information that may have helped to determine whether or not this person actually took their own life. Someone is driving along the Cable Beach Road, those nice big trees that are out there. No one else is on the road, and the car ends up in one of those trees. It's an accident. But how do you know it was not?
It wasn't deliberate.
An intent
yeah,
to commit suicide. So when we talk about the statistics, mm-hmm, the statistics only tell a part of the story.
Yeah.
How do we make this information more accurate? Well, I guess we have to really look at that and see how we could get more accurate information on statistics. What we do know is that the statistics rate for suicide in the Bahamas has been increasing. We've always had suicides now and then. We also know that sometimes it can be a contagion. If someone hears about a suicide and they've been thinking about it, they said, okay, so-and-so was brave enough to go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Why not me? My life is miserable. You know, I've been suffering. I've been thinking about this long and hard.
Yeah.
And so maybe that may, in fact, spur other persons on to do it. But yeah, suicide is a problem, and maybe we need now to begin to look at how we can put things in place to better educate people about some of the danger, the warning signs that could tell us that somebody may be at particularly high risk.
Yeah.
And so when people change in a way that says, I'm checking out, I'm giving away things, I keep referring to when I go, what I want you to do for me, how I want to be treated, what I want at the final event, my funeral, when they begin giving away objects and articles that they held dearly, and
yeah,
you knew they would not necessarily want to give those away. Those are signals that tell you that this person may in fact be thinking about it. When people have had a long and protracted, very severe depressive illness, that could tell you sometimes that we have to be careful here.
Yeah.
When people have an illness in which they may be suffering from perceptions, what we call command, directions, orders, take your life, hurt yourself, you're no good, derogatory remarks, take yourself out of the situation, you'll be better off dead. Those kinds of either hallucinatory voices or maybe ideas that come into their head may in fact indicate that this person is at risk. And then we have people who already lost somebody who says, I just want to be with that person. I want to go behind them. I want to be where so-and-so is. That person has died. We have to be careful with that person too. We have to look very carefully and see whether or not this person needs an intervention to help them get over whatever it is they're experiencing.
Counseling is obviously going to be very important for the general public as well as the people on the front line dealing with.
Well, information and education is always necessary. Whenever we're facing a threat, whenever there's a phenomena that's happening that people don't know much about, education is one of the key tools to bring people's information level up. And then we need to tell people about what to expect as far as we know. And then to set up systems that make it easy to access help when necessary. Remove all the barriers, take away those barricades, those hurdles that may be in place that stop people from moving forward and getting help. The hotlines is one way of doing that. The community clinics is one way of doing that. A show like this one perhaps is very helpful for people out there too who may be in fact wondering, is my family member at risk? So if somebody's had very low mood for weeks on end, if somebody has been preoccupied with death and dying, if somebody's been thinking about what their last wishes, what they want to be done when they're gone, when people have had that kind of thing happening, then we need to be aware that this may be somebody, and we can ask the question. It doesn't hurt to ask, what have you been thinking? Have you been thinking about taking your life? Are you thinking that you'd be better off dead? That doesn't necessarily push the person to do it. In fact, it may be a very welcome opening for them to talk about what they've been feeling. And then to take action after that and to say, look, I'll take you, I'll go with you to go and see the doctor at the community clinic. I'll go with you. I'll sit with you while you call the hotline if that's what we're going to do right now in preparation for further action.
In addition to talking as we come to the end of this, we're tactile beings. We like to, especially in the Bahamas, we like to hug people. We want to touch you. We can't touch people now. What's that going to do to us? How is that going to prevent us from getting to where we need to get to?
We are social beings, human beings everywhere. When they engage with other persons, benefit from the proximity and from the touch. Very important ways of communicating. Now to be hampered with the restrictions that say you can't do certain things may pose a problem for some of us. But we adapt and we find different ways of greeting now. Rather than doing the vigorous handshake, the pump, and then the embrace and all that, we do the fist thing and we do the arm thing. And people make physical contact in a different way. Now, being alone is another issue.
Yes.
And we have to find ways to have interactions with persons, maybe not in physical presence, but we have this whole gamut of resources that we could use to continue to have contact with the people who we wish to be in contact with. The internet, social media, maybe it's used for a lot of other stuff, but now it could be used for this very important, very, very important issue of being in contact with our loved ones and our friends.
Including the old-fashioned telephone. Thank you very much.
The telephone is fantastic.
Right. Thank you
the
very much.
Smartphone particularly.
Particularly. But thank you very much for all of that, and I guess we need a part 2 or part 3, but thank you very much for coming and talking to us today about the possible fallout from COVID-19. And thank you for watching A Closer Look. Remember, you can also watch us on Facebook and on YouTube.